Emily Carter woke before her alarm, her mind already racing, the pale Chicago light slipping through the curtains as if it carried a warning she could not name, and even before her feet touched the floor she felt it. That quiet pull in her chest that had been growing for months, the sense that her life was standing at the edge of something bigger than her plans, because Emily had always believed she was the kind of person who wanted one clear love and one clear future. Yet here she was at 32, successful on paper, calm on the outside, and deeply unsettled inside, moving through her morning routine with practiced speed while memories and thoughts collided in her head. Daniel's gentle laugh from years ago echoing beside Marcus's confident voice from just yesterday, Lucas's steady presence drifting in from childhood, and Ethan's thoughtful words arriving like letters from another version of life. And she wondered how she had let her heart stretch so wide without noticing the strain, because none of it began with intention or desire to complicate things. It began with small moments. Daniel calling her from Boston after a long silence just to ask if she was happy. Marcus offering her coffee during a late work night and talking about dreams instead of deadlines. Lucas sending her an old photo from Seattle that reminded her who she used to be. And Ethan listening during a writing workshop in Toronto as if her thoughts mattered more than his own. And as Emily stepped outside into the cold air, she felt the weight of these connections not as guilt but as urgency, because something was shifting and she could feel it in the way she walked faster than usual, the way her phone felt heavier in her coat pocket, the way her chest tightened every time it buzzed, and when Daniel's message finally appeared asking if they could talk, her breath caught not because she feared him but because she knew that conversation would open a door she had been keeping closed, and she realized that part of her had been living on pause, afraid to choose and afraid not to, drifting between comfort and curiosity, telling herself that as long as nothing crossed a line everything was fine. But deep down she knew that emotional distance could be just as powerful as physical closeness. And that morning as she rode the train downtown surrounded by strangers with their own quiet battles, she admitted something she had never said out loud, that she was tired of shrinking her feelings to fit a story she no longer believed in, because love had shown up in her life wearing different faces and offering different gifts, and instead of rejecting that truth she had allowed it to stay, growing stronger each day. And at her office desk she worked quickly, answering emails and finishing tasks with sharp focus as if speed could outrun her thoughts, yet every completed task only made the silence louder. And when Marcus stopped by her desk with his easy smile and asked if she was okay, she almost said yes out of habit but stopped herself, meeting his eyes and feeling that familiar spark mixed with trust, and in that brief pause she understood how dangerous honesty could be, not because it hurts others, but because it demands action. And later during lunch she sat alone watching people pass by the cafe window, couples holding hands, friends laughing, strangers brushing past without meaning, and she wondered how many of them were carrying secret questions the way she was. Questions about wanting more, wanting differently, wanting truth instead of comfort, and she thought of Lucas then, how he never rushed her, how he listened without expectation, how he knew her fears before she spoke them, and she felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with gratitude, realizing that some connections do not fade even when distance grows. And when her phone buzzed again with a message from Ethan asking how her day was going, she felt a softness spread through her chest, because his words never asked for more than she could give, yet they made her want to give more anyway. And as the day rushed toward evening she sensed that this was the last day of pretending that nothing needed to change, because she was no longer confused about her feelings. She was confused about the rules she had been taught to follow, rules that said wanting more depth was greedy, that caring deeply must always come with ownership, that the heart should stay within clear lines. And standing at the train platform that evening with the city humming around her, Emily made a quiet decision that frightened her more than any breakup ever could. She decided to stop lying to herself, even if the truth complicated everything. And as she stepped onto the train she did not know which connection would shift first or how the others would respond. But she knew that by morning something would be different, because when a heart wakes up, it refuses to go back to sleep. The meeting with Daniel happened sooner than Emily expected, and the moment she saw him waiting near the Riverwalk in Boston, hands in his coat pockets, she felt how time could fold years into seconds, because this was the man who once knew her plans better than she did, yet now there was space between them that no memory could close. And as they walked side by side with the cold air pressing around them, Daniel spoke with careful honesty, saying he felt her slipping away long before distance made it obvious, and Emily listened without defense, realizing that love can fade not through failure but through quiet change, and when she finally spoke, she chose truth over comfort, telling him she cared deeply but no longer felt rooted in the life they once imagined, and Daniel nodded slowly, pain crossing his face but no anger following it, because he loved her enough to let her go. And when they said goodbye there were no promises to stay the same, only gratitude for what had been real, and Emily carried that heaviness back to Chicago where the city lights felt sharper and louder than before, and at work Marcus noticed her intensity immediately, the way she moved faster, spoke less, and held her thoughts close, and instead of pushing, he offered support in small ways, sharing coffee, walking with her after late meetings, reminding her that strength did not mean silence. And one evening as they talked about ambition and fear, Emily saw how Marcus challenged her to grow rather than settle, yet that same drive made her wonder if their paths could truly match, because his life moved at a pace that demanded certainty. And certainty was the one thing she did not have. And later that night Lucas called from Seattle, his voice calm and familiar, and without planning to, Emily told him everything she had been holding inside, not the details but the weight. And Lucas listened without interruption, then confessed that he had always cared for her in a deeper way, not with urgency but with patience, saying he never wanted to pressure her, only to be honest, and his words landed gently yet firmly, making her realize how long she had leaned on his understanding without fully seeing the cost. And as the call ended she sat in silence, aware that every truth spoken shifted something unseen, and before she could rest, a message arrived from Ethan, thoughtful as always, asking nothing more than how her heart was holding up, and she replied honestly, admitting she felt pulled in different directions, and Ethan answered with warmth, saying that confusion was not weakness but a sign of growth, and those words stayed with her through the night as she lay awake thinking about how each connection reflected a different part of herself. Daniel reminding her of who she had been, Marcus showing her who she could become, Lucas grounding her in who she truly was, and Ethan offering space to heal without demand, and the realization struck her with both wonder and fear that wanting all of that did not come from greed but from a deep need to feel whole. And as morning arrived she understood that her heart was not breaking but expanding, stretching beyond rules she once accepted without question, and though she did not know how to carry so much without causing pain, she knew that turning away from truth would hurt more in the end, and standing at her window watching the city wake up, Emily accepted that this chapter of her life would be defined not by easy answers but by brave honesty, because hearts do not follow rules, and hers had already chosen its own path. Emily knew the moment she woke up that avoiding the truth was no longer possible, because carrying unspoken feelings had begun to feel heavier than any possible loss, so she chose a path that demanded courage instead of comfort and decided to speak honestly to everyone, not to ask for anything but to clear the quiet confusion that had settled around her life. And she began with Daniel, writing him a long message that thanked him for the years they shared, acknowledged the love that once guided them, and gently closed the door they had both been holding half open. And when he replied with kindness and acceptance, she felt pain but also relief, realizing that endings handled with respect can heal instead of harm. And next she spoke to Marcus in person, choosing a calm evening after work when the city felt less rushed, and she told him plainly that she cared for him but was still finding her footing, that she could not promise clarity yet. And Marcus surprised her by listening without interruption, admitting that while he wanted a future, he respected honesty more than certainty, and his response strengthened her trust even as it left questions unanswered. And later that week she called Lucas, knowing that conversation would be delicate, because he had always been her safe place, and she told him she finally understood how deeply he had cared and how long he had waited. And instead of resentment, Lucas offered understanding, saying that love given freely is never wasted, and his calm acceptance made her realize that true connection does not demand repayment. And finally she met Ethan during another workshop session. And in a quiet corner of a bookstore cafe she explained that her heart was full of questions, not promises, and Ethan smiled softly, telling her that he valued honesty over expectation, that companionship does not need labels to be meaningful. And with each conversation Emily felt something loosen inside her, as if the fear she carried had been rooted not in love itself but in secrecy. And once the truth was spoken, something unexpected happened. None of them walked away in anger, none accused her of wrongdoing, because she had not misled or used anyone. She had simply allowed space for genuine connection, and over time the shape of those relationships shifted naturally. Daniel became a supportive voice from afar. Marcus grew into a steady presence built on shared respect. Lucas remained her emotional anchor without pressure, and Ethan continued to share thoughtful conversations that brought peace instead of tension. And Emily began to see that love does not always demand possession or exclusivity to be real, that emotional honesty can create balance instead of chaos. And though moments of doubt still surfaced, especially when she questioned whether society would ever understand her choices, she reminded herself that her life felt lighter, clearer, and more aligned than it had in years. And as weeks passed, she noticed how her energy changed, how she smiled more easily, how she slept better, how her creativity returned. Because she was no longer divided between who she was and who she pretended to be. And one evening, as she walked along the lakefront watching the city lights reflect on the water, Emily understood that she had not gathered 4 people around her heart. She had uncovered 4 truths about herself. That she could honor the past without living in it, that growth requires bravery, that patience is a form of love, and that healing happens when expectations are replaced with presence. And standing there with the cool air on her face, she accepted that life might still test her balance, but for the first time she trusted herself to meet it with honesty. Because when truth leads the way, even complex paths can feel right. Years passed more quickly than Emily ever expected, and life settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than forced, because once she chose honesty, everything else began to align in quiet but meaningful ways. And she found herself sitting one autumn morning at a small lakeside cafe in Toronto, notebook open, pen moving easily across the page, realizing how far she had come from the woman who once feared her own feelings. And Daniel now existed in her life as a kind memory and a thoughtful voice through occasional messages, his happiness no longer a reminder of loss but proof that letting go can be an act of love. And Marcus stood beside her in daily life, not as a perfect answer but as a partner who respected her independence and shared her values, building a future through steady choices instead of dramatic promises. And Lucas remained close, visiting often, their bond deepened by years of trust. His presence, a reminder that loyalty does not need ownership to feel secure. And Ethan, seated across from her that morning, smiled gently as they talked about writing and growth, his calm companionship continuing to offer understanding without pressure. And in that simple moment, Emily finally understood the truth behind her journey, that she had never been chasing people but meaning, never collecting hearts but experiences that shaped her. And she reflected on how each connection had given her something lasting. Daniel teaching her grace in endings, Marcus showing her how love can grow through effort, Lucas reminding her that patience can be powerful, and Ethan helping her rediscover emotional peace. And she smiled as she realized she had not broken rules but questioned them, choosing a life built on respect rather than fear. And as she closed her notebook, she felt a deep sense of balance, knowing that her happiness did not come from having everything, but from understanding what truly mattered, that love is not a single path but a landscape shaped by honesty, timing, and choice. And as the lake shimmered under the open sky, Emily felt calm and complete, not because her life was simple, but because it was real.